And welcome to Portal Mountain Development, meeting number 68. Only one meeting away from that coveted milestone.
Magic number.
Yeah, so we are continuing on driving ahead at some practical development of a product called the Dashboard. And this is our social media type of application for connecting data.
Also known as the isomorphic component of computing injected into our computing machines to represent us as actual,
Right. Yes.
organic creatures.
Organic creatures. I'm glad you mentioned
in
that.
an environment. It's very much set to be that isomorphism, and
Yes.
it's one of its primary requirements. So,
In other words, to be able to have media and in which you can represent organization of people, of organisms, of basically any life.
yeah,
kind of
as
thing.
as it happens in the real world. So we're looking at modeling not just the what's called the business functionality of the app, but we're also trying to mimic the environment in which that application is going to actually be present. So it's a pretty tall order, as we like to call.
We do. What do you mean by mimic the environment? That's
So
like mapping.
Mimicking, like, say you walk into a room, what does that look like when you start conversations inside of a medium like air? Like it's supposed to mimic much more closer the relationship of not like having like railway channels of communications where you have like a set path from one node to another, but more like there's a bunch of nodes in a space and they create their own channels that dissipate with time and,
Right.
and rearrange themselves
To me,
in all sorts of kind of ways.
It's sort of like Lego
Oh yeah.
for organization. And just the various types of Lego pieces represent different
No,
types of
when you say
things.
organization, it always gives me the connotation of like the corporate world. Is that what you're referring to?
Not the corporate world necessarily. That could be one application, but even I usually think more
Just
of
grouping.
like community, like a
Yeah,
community
yeah.
garden.
I think the nomenclature for a group is easier to digest and not like. I'm just noticing that because it gives me that connotation, I'm guessing it might also translate for other people.
Which could be a good thing, though.
Just want to point out that that's probably not what you want.
I guess to me that kind of points at the potential power of it.
Yeah,
of
that
the
it can go
system.
that route.
Yeah, right.
So that's more like if this works on the social level, on the corporate level, it's going to be even that much better, so to speak. Yeah,
Right. So
Agreed.
you may call it community at one level, an organization at another level.
a group
Something
on
like
a
that.
third level, a family, a bunch of friends, any kind of like, really even staying alone with your own thoughts, even.
Right. And so this sort of system, forget where I was going to go with that.
It was about mimicry. It was about the isomorphism between it and the real agency that we
Just trying to
experience.
think of or give like a sort of overview of it. You should be able to utilize this system as like a sort of platform for any type of grouping or community organization, such as like Uber, like the ride sharing program.
Coordination, I think, is what you're driving at. You can coordinate any kind of community or groupings.
Yeah, so like kind of a sort of a highly potential platform that can do almost basically anything.
Almost like a social engine, perhaps.
The social engine. Yeah.
Not so much social media, although borrowing heavily from those developments. It's kind of like more of an engine in that it's driving shit. It's also it's not just meant for being a passive sort of platform, but one also with its own agency, so to speak, integrated into its operation.
Pardon.
That's what we call the strange loop.
Getting set up here.
When the program itself considers itself being part of also its own agency, or part of the agency contingency within the program. Contingency might not be the right word. You might have stepped out a little bit out of my element there, but something close to that. Right, like what I'm saying is that the dashboard itself
Yes,
has an
extended.
agency as one of the people that you can converse with, so to speak. People being a very
Sure.
broad. So that's like a self-referential loop in which automation can actually step in and the dashboard can talk code with itself, for example. Two dashboards talking to each other that's one conversation that you can have. Anyway, that's like all. I'm getting ahead of
Right,
myself
that-
because it's not screen stuff.
That's cool. That seems like it's linked in with the idea of extensibility or whatever
Yeah,
of the dashboard, like being able to just kind of jut out in one way and have that be part of the program itself.
So if we look at the internet as the environment, the dashboard is supposed to be an organism living in that, with other dashboards comprising the social environment in which it's operating. So it's like repeating the same loop that we have with the guild framework. It's basically building guilds into itself,
Right.
just by its shape.
Anyways, so yeah, that's just kind of a bit of rambling to get a general idea of what this social engine could be used for. Basically,
Could.
basically anything.
Could.
Basically anything.
It is a species of organisms
Right.
talking to each other in an environment.
So I got
The actual like
setting
underlying
up here.
framework of it, right? Like I try to like explain it as best I can. Like you can have like your own private node sitting on this network talking to other things, or you can have that very same private node represented in many different spaces all at once, synchronized to itself, right? So it's like you exist in this room, in that room, and in that room, which may have the same physical space, for example, like an open office situation, if you can imagine that one, or like like your shop, right? Like you can just walk over to the next table, and it's all of a sudden you're switching context into whatever the other person is working on, for example. I can imagine that being the case. Like
Right.
you may have a common context, but their context is not the same as your context individually.
Like many people can be working on, say, one piece of furniture, but different components. So they have the same
Yeah, exactly.
virtual image of it, sort of at their
The complete
bench.
everybody has the same complete image, but everybody's part image is like a very different
Right.
than that.
Because they're feeding a different context into it.
And that part has to work with itself first before it can be integrated into the bigger picture, right? Like if you have a part that doesn't even fit the bigger picture to begin with, and it doesn't fit the smaller picture it's supposed to be a part of, you're not going to fit the final component into the final picture, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that's an allusion to that test framework that I was saying. It's going to test those individual parts first to say, oh, am I getting what I expected? If I'm getting what I expected on this level, I can get what I'm expecting on the higher level to work. If length times width equals area, and I'm looking for area, and I get my area, right? I can trust that the area calculation is going correctly.
Yeah. So I'm not that good at programming, but I'm trying to
But you
white
can't-
knuckle it, and we're gonna get some things done today.
But you can figure, but you can think of the big picture compartmentalized into a bunch of smaller pictures. Each one has to be self-contained and work with itself properly, which could be composed of another set of smaller pictures, and so on and so forth. This is called decomposition. You decompose the big picture into the smaller parts, make sure the smaller parts all work properly, and then you do a step of combining them, make sure that works properly. Combine the combinations, make sure that works properly. This is called integration testing.
Yeah, like I'm imagining, like say a table leg. If you're making the table top, which has to attach to the table leg, someone else is making the leg, you both need to use the same style of joinery.
Same style of joinery. You have to have the same size legs, same length, for example, or else you're going to have a wobbly fucking table.
Right.
So when you get down to the very granular, like testing a leg for parameters, it has to be this wide, it has to be this long, it has to be this thick, all of those, it has to be following this contour, all of those little details. That's called unit testing. You take a unit, as a single isolated unit, and you test that, and then you take all your units and you integrate. So that's called integration testing, which has its own set of expectations. Like when these two pieces combine together, I expect them to communicate this way, right? So just fitting in the bigger picture after you got the smaller picture.
Cool. Yeah, so lots of progress in the dashboard chat. Lots of chattings, talkings, convergencings of different teams, if you will. Anders and his buddy have joined us there. And I think there was a lot of discussion about kind of framework and ideological kind of stuff.
Yeah. Ideologically speaking, the only thing we're really need to hone in on is the isomorphism. So conversation and broadcast are points of our isomorphism, with the latter, workshop and automation being the facilitators of that interface, kind of like behind the scenes, so to speak, but also open to manipulation after the fact. Which is precisely why we're not going to concentrate on anything to do with those screens, because those will take the shape of a very different style. They're still engines that pertain to the system. In fact, behind the scenes, they're going to be used to drive conversation, to drive broadcast. But that's not the initial user-facing interface. That's like, once we get the conversation part right, once we get the broadcast part right, we will open up for the dashboard to be able to broadcast and communicate with itself. But the first steps is to get humans to do that part. That way, the dashboard will reflect what the humans do. There's not going to be a difference. We're not going to build one in. So the same operational interfaces that people are using to communicate through the dashboard is going to be used by the dashboard to run itself as well. And
I'm just trying to imagine why a dashboard would talk to itself.
Automation,
yeah.
So like a dashboard not responsible for necessarily collecting all the conversational pieces, but collecting some contract information and then using that information to drive a transaction of some sort, for example. So more business oriented sort of logic that has its own rule sets that are, can be automated. So instead of having a human do all of the stuff, you have a small little program to take care of the steps for you.
And just sort of waiting for inputs, probably, in a lot of cases. Listening on the media. So in many cases, you would have many dashboards
just reacting to stuff.
Tapping on a media. Some of them are directly controlled by a person.
And some of them not. And then all of them can talk to each other and can proxy through each other. So one can pretend. So like it's like you pretending to be my agency for the sake of a legal transaction,
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know how people have what do you call it? Power of attorney.
Right.
So like you can have the dashboard represent another dashboard by just simply proxying information through, but
Mm-hmm.
being that wall.
I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it has all of these like different ways it can exist on that as a node on that framework. Some of them completely automated, some of them partially, some of them not at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like so in a case of say like an Uber replacement type of thing, on a single media you may have a bunch of drivers listening and a bunch of passengers who want
Right.
a ride. So a passenger says, "Hey, I want a ride." The driver doesn't get it. There's a dashboard sitting there collecting rides and nudging the people who are closest to, "Hey, do you want to take this? Do you want
Yeah,
to take
and
this?"
so you can understand how connecting that driver to the passenger would be the initiation of a conversation behind the scenes. So behind the scenes,
Right.
the dashboard opens up an actual conversation just like you would have used the normal interface, but you don't see that interface. You just get the bits and pieces that you need to set up the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And they get the bits
Right,
and pieces
so-
they need to set up the
So like
ride
my
themselves.
advertisement of I need a ride, that going onto the media is picked up by an automation dashboard, and that's sort of already the start of a conversation.
Yeah, like somebody starts a conversation and they're waiting for another participant to join into the conversation to negotiate
Because
the transaction.
maybe maybe you would have a preference, like maybe it should come back to you with a list of I gotcha, come back with a list of drivers who are nearby, and maybe you want to pick one to send that advertisement to.
So I'm gonna throw a curveball at you. Do you know what happens in these kinds of circumstances? People's racism really shines.
Right.
Because what will happen in that situation is that people will actually be very clear on their dislikes of specific groups of people. I know this because this is happening at my workplace right now when we have service providers who will not provide services for specific neighborhoods. Like, you can't convince them otherwise.
Right.
So you have to deal with that sort of shit. So, which is why something like Uber comes way after the actual dashboard with communication and coherence is oiled and greased up pretty well.
Okay. So we've got a short introduction of what dashboard is, sort of, and an example here.
Oh, I totally forgot to do my introduction spiel, which was supposed to be us two middle-aged white males telling the world how the world works.
Yes, but everybody knew that already. So
Yeah.
we've said it too many times.
Just so we're clear, this is us two white males telling you, the world, how it works. Middle-aged.
Yes. So we're automatically disqualified.
No. No. Pinnacle of privilege. Come on. It just goes to show you, though, like, it is quite a privilege. We can just sit here and shoot the shit without worrying about any fucking
man.
thing.
Yep. Even living in this country, in this city.
Well, this city is actually very particularly white. Not so in the last 20 years,
No, I think it's changed big time.
but when I moved
Gained
here,
50,000
when
in
I
20 years.
when I first moved here, it was such a cultural shock because I first moved to Toronto, which is like everybody and their mother is there.
Yeah, I get it.
And then you go back to Barrie, and it's like the whitest hick town you can possibly imagine.
It's been known to be kind of racist and in group, if you will, and Scottish, I guess, with the business networking and that kind of stuff. Like,
Oh,
if
yeah,
you're an
it's-
outsider, you're not in.
It's very British, very very British.
Anyways, yeah. So that's us. So we want to start.
We're just giving them our qualifications.
Yes, very qualified.
But all jokes aside, we mentioned this generally just to impart the general sensitivity that we have to the ongoing world situation that we find ourselves in. That we definitely are not in sync with. At least speaking for myself, it was just
Yeah,
bizarre.
yeah, yeah. We're not out to like convince anybody or do anything like that. However, we feel like this is a chance for ourselves to practice, and um, we feel like, I guess, the kind of insights we've got gained along the way. We're in certain positions, like you've been a programmer for how many years to be able to do this.
I was 14
Um,
years old when I was introduced to programming. I'm turning 40 this year, so we're running around 26 years.
mhm, right, and um, I guess my own story is kind of like a, I don't know, spiritual awakening type thing, which I think is very
Well, look,
topical for like the times, and the what we're talking about
that's not
here.
exclusive to you.
Um,
I had my spiritual awakening. It just happened differently.
right.
I didn't have like
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
whole.
we've both been through the journey.
I didn't have the dark night of the soul as a pronounced
Yeah,
element
not
of
as bad
mine.
as I did.
We were worried about you at some points,
Yeah,
especially
sure,
especially
of course.
when the what do you call it, the call center shit. You just like got up and left.
Hmm. Yep, that was half a year after it happened to me. Uh,
My wife was like, "Do not do that. Do not do that."
do not do. Yeah. No. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we
But.
also had different life circumstances too. I had kids, you didn't.
Hmm. Right. So yeah, we know like we're not out there to preach or anything like that, but at the same time, we've
We
been
are.
working on this for years, and it's there have been so many like insight moments, if you will, and like confirmations, synchronicities, kind of, where it's like, how is this in front of
Well,
me now? Like it's so it all makes sense.
so one of the reasons I make the joke that we are middle-aged white males telling the world how it is because of the underlying uh, trajectory of what we've been doing, what it has caused to happen, and in particular, uh, the the connections that we've experienced going back down through civilization is we're like going through the past. You know how we talk about the tribe and all of
Hmm.
that stuff in a different context usually than
Right.
normally understood. So that idea of like taking ourselves back to that same origin, so to speak, story, has been a huge connective sort of experience in like it all of the European stuff, the like wherever you're coming from stuff starts to melt away in a way, and like when we see like
Hmm.
the human tribe itself for what it is, what we stop seeing is a very pronounced distinction of what it looks like, right? So in a way, it's a way for us to connect back to the same kind of roots that we've been told about by others who are quote unquote uncivilized, if you will, who are not part of the same project.
Hmm.
So
Right.
like so that's the running joke for me in that like the qualification isn't coming from my whiteness or middle ageness or any of that stuff. This particular journey has caused this middle-aged white man to completely to feel way more connected with a more primitive element of humanity. By primitive, I'm not saying negative, but I'm saying
Hmm.
the thing that
Fundamental.
ties us together more.
Right.
My connotations toward tribalism is very different than what you normally find in
Hmm.
my what do you call it?
Contemporaries.
Demographic.
Right. Right, right. Yeah, I always like giving kind of like overviews a little bit if possible, but we always forget to at the
Well, I like
start
to
of our meetings.
I like to sometimes pour my
Um,
heart out, you know.
Another way of maybe pointing at that is the juxtaposition of the capitalist market economy, in which everything is, you only get it if you exchange. That's exchange based.
Quantification, yeah.
And juxtaposed with the gift economy, which is again what we would say is a more fundamental human experience from which the market emerged.
Quality, yeah.
right? So in
It's the
that
problem account
in that way of looking at it,
101, basically.
we're digging back to the fundamental roots and building something up with that. And this is where this type of technology is compatible with
Right.
that type
So,
of economy.
and this technology has two parts to it: quantification and qualification. Those are literally the parts of it. The qualified parts are the mimicry of conversation and broadcast. Those are, but the quantified parts is the workshop and the automation, because those are algorithmics. Algorithmics. Those are algorithmic, right? Like, so they have to be quantified in some sense.
Right.
The difference between this software and, say, a variation on this kind of software is that one dashboard can quantify things one way, another dashboard can quantify things a completely different way, and they might need a third dashboard to even consolidate what the fuck they're talking about, because they're actually in contradiction as is with each other. They might use the same nomenclature to say different things, but you lift that nomenclature up to another level, and all of a sudden it justifies this iteration and that iteration. So, in all things, it tries to mimic the shortcomings of representation, and have those shortcomings explicitly built in. So this is a bit abstract here, but what I'm getting at is that with Gödel's incompleteness theorem, there is a clear limitation to representation that we have to account for. And that is, within any context, if you have a nomenclature, it's either going to be incomplete, so it's not going to say everything about what it's talking about, or it's going to become contradictory to itself. So it's going to say X is Y and Y is not X, just like weird combinations of logic that will arise from representation. What that means is each dashboard is really contextualized to a one kind of representation. The way to get around this is to use other dashboards that use different kinds of representations to consolidate contradictory things or incomplete things, or switch languages, basically.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay, just forgot to share the link here. Doing that right now. Got the chat rolling.
I'm glad that Anders added that guy in. I invited him back in and sent him a link. Telling him that the problem is finished.
Yeah, that sucked. I don't think he was gonna stay gone. He said he was coming back anyways, but yeah.
Yeah, it was just
a
an
little bit of
unfortunate sequence. So Anders did a solid there. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. So shared, and so that's the kind of intro, dashboardy stuff, and where we're coming from with that, and why this technology is relevant. Now we're building a program, and we need to decide how it looks.
Yeah. So right off the bat, to just like cover a lot of bases, and for usability for our audience, if you were to imagine a forum, and if you were to imagine a chat program such as Telegram and Reddit, think of something that merges the two concepts together, so you can switch from one to the other. So one we call broadcast, which is like throwing information out into the world, which is our forum engine, if you will. And one is conversation, which is way more directed, when you select an agent to send that information to. So it's not like for any agency to pick up, it's directed. And then there's the whole merging of the two as far as conversations are broadcasts.
And you can have multiple agents in a conversation.
Multiple agents in the conversation, which is akin to opening up a chat room with specific accounts, being participants in that chat room.
Mhm.
The difference being is that the conversation is a beginning, the actual conversation, and then ends. Whereas these kinds of channels right now that we're experiencing are permanent, and they don't
Mhm.
they don't reflect what we do as people, as agents in the environment that we're in. So they don't mimic that part of the interaction, which is what we're adding to the chat engines
Mhm.
of our time. It's really that, taking the chat engine that we all know and love and modifying it to be the conversation engine. So with that, it's not a lot of work, it's just a lot of thinking.
Mhm.
So a conversation has its own screens, its own controls that you would have. So, for example, sending the message, that would look like a lot like chat. However, entering a conversation interface, all of that is not a solved problem yet. We should find a way to take what we know and you think about how, like, if you have a group of people, you have your, they exist in this room. So how do we represent the room? How do we represent the people in the room? How do we select people in the room to engage in a conversation with? How do they respond with a yay or a nay? So, for example, if you select 6 people for a conversation but only 4 want to participate, what does that look like? Who presses which button when? Right? Like
Hmm.
all of that little tiny interfacial. So what I want to picture is why I'm holding my hand like this. I'm picturing a phone in my hand, and you're scrolling up, you're scrolling down, you're scrolling sideways. You're clicking a button here, you're clicking a button there, and you're trying to do all of this with one hand, right? So you want to keep everything close to this area. So that's the
Right.
phone. And then we have a desktop app, you have a mouse, a keyboard, and you have that. On top of this, you have to think about deaf, blind, colorblind people, and all of that.
Sure. Not right off the bat, though.
Well, right off the bat, because you don't want to get it to a solution only to realize it does not work for like 75% of people for one specific assumption. So you'd want to you want to start with those assumptions built in, right? Like you want to be like, okay, I'm creating a button. How does a regular person
Like,
see it?
but
How
no,
how does a blind person see
that's
it?
fine. I don't
That's
know
a
how blind people interact. Like I've heard,
screen readers. So you would have to give the components extra information to say this is that, and so the screen reader will, instead of saying image, it'd be like image about blah 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 is here, right? Like it will like actually. So these
man.
are the that's the tougher
But
part.
that's fine. But I think we shouldn't talk about that right now because that
Oh
will
no.
just screw my head up. Because I have no idea how to even start
So
to a non-deaf person.
no. I all I'm trying to say is there's the happy path for us. That's the interface. But while we're building it, we got to keep in mind the fact that not everybody can or will be able to interact with that.
Yeah, I think we just need to get something down and then iterate.
Yeah.
Because
So
it's
once we
not
get
going
it,
to take long to make some screens.
so
right?
when you get the first screen, you're gonna one of the iterations is going to be like, okay, this is the screen of like the perfect healthy individual. What does the screen look like in this situation? What does the screen look like in that situation?
Mm-hmm.
That's the iteration part, and yes, it's part of it. But I'm mentioning this now. There is like a ground to cover. One of those grounds is the accessibility, and that's a legal thing. So when you're making apps, you actually have to like apps that can be installed, right, by people in different countries who have laws and all of
I'm
that jazz.
totally down, man. But
I'm not
we
complicating
haven't
it for
even
you.
started drawing the screen.
I'm not complicating it for you so much so is like I want you to really, really, really keep in mind that the happy path is only one variant.
That's fine.
That's it. And that's it. So we'll start with the actual, and then we can iterate over the accessible and all of that stuff. That's called accessibility.
So, my thinking would be like, okay, so if we're going to start with conversations, let's say you may have a list of conversations, but how did those get there? First, you need a list of contacts
Yes.
in order to converse with them or select them.
Presented as agents, right? Agencies. So the agent is like, it could be localized or distributed or anything in between.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know what the agent is, but we do know that there's a token identifying said agent, and to that token we speak.
Right. And token, are you talking encryption or
Identifier. So
authenticatable?
yeah, so like a way to differentiate you having a conversation versus me having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Say it's distributed. How will each database know to record for you or to record for me? That
Right.
token is going
And
to
what
tell
if we
them.
both have the same name?
Exactly. So that token is going to identify you uniquely. Not you, an agency. Any agency within the framework is identified by that token. Some of those agents can be actual people. There's no
Mm-hmm.
limit to how many agents you can be. And there's no limit to how many agents can represent you. So you could have 5 different agencies proxied through a single agency. Like there's no one-to-one of a person to the token, and the reason for that is like, you today is not you tomorrow, right? Like that's not the thing. That's not
Mm-hmm.
what we're after. We're talking about like being able to create these tokens day by day if you need to just represent yourself differently if you have to. Like there's no it's not about like trying to massage out a unique identity out in the real world any more than there is like a way to massage out like your mythology out of your head. So if we have Odin as a quote unquote our patron god, for example, and we're both talking about it in the same mythology,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like there's no rule to say that this is not the same Odin, for example. Like I'm using a really rough example, but I'm trying to illustrate a concept rather than drill down to something practical here.
Great. Okay, that seems a bit confusing because when you wake up tomorrow and you want to chat with your buddy, now he has a different token on the network and you don't know where he is.
Well, that's up to your buddy to distribute said token. If he's in a different mood than he was yesterday and he wants to have a different kind of conversation entirely as a different person, then he has to re-engage the community as that different person. The burden's still on that person. Like just because your internal world changed, it does not. If you need that change to be reflected, you need your coherence to facilitate that. Coherence referring
Right.
back to our previous conversation. That's why I'm not defining it.
So,
So
shall we?
coherence is a very important element of conversations and broadcasts.
Shall we do the impossible task?
Start with the screens.
I don't know. I
Let's
guess.
do it. Let's do it.
I guess so. We can start over.
What screen strikes your fancy first? Out of my rough sketching.
What even? Oh well, I want to do like cell phone
Yeah,
first.
thank you. Mobile first is actually a great way to start because a mobile screen is very limited, which means you gotta really, really think about what's relevant on the screen and what's not relevant. So, if you're in a conversation, you don't want a cluttered interface that prevents you from sending your messages into the conversation, right?
Right.
And the phone is a great litmus test because you have so little screen space. So and this is where this motion comes into play. You have to think about a screen like this size, and you have to think about the thumb. So left-handed, right-handed, whatever, but you have to think about spacing, like how far can your thumb reach across the screen, right? Before you use another hand or any of that stuff. And you want to localize all of your
You
interactions.
can get the whole screen with one thumb.
Wait, yeah, but measure your hand against mine. Other hand. Other hand.
Yeah.
What do you see? I don't have the same reach.
Almost an extra inch.
Yeah, so I don't have the same reach. So what you got to do is basically like, what do you notice? You notice that everything pretty much wants to be here, and that is part of the Android's design schema. You will
Yeah.
you will see a button here that you can hold, and it will open up a bunch of interactive things.
Sure.
Plus the bottom interface that you can click on. Leaving the menu at the top and the menu on the other side of the top less used, for example, than the bottom ones. And that's something the iPhone picked up on really well, actually, as far as the interface goes. That's why we have different standards for Android and iPhone. Because the iPhone literally focused on this thumb issue, whereas the Android was like, yes, that, but plus this and that. So we got to be clever and be like, okay, on the phone, we want to localize pretty much everything we possibly want. Oh, there's usually a button here, like that, or something, some shit like that. It's called a hovering button. We want to localize as much functionality here, and like the least stuff here, and anything in between here, right?
Yeah, it's not really showing up.
So,
Well, yeah.
and this is just mobile design 101 for apps in general. So we want this to be like number 1, this to be our 2, but also question, and this is 3 and double question. So like almost anything you will never use. Unless you needed to like
Navigate.
change a profile setting, or like shit that just like lives in the ether as data rather than part of the actual stuff that's
Okay.
happening. Sure.
So we can start with a screen like that size. That'd be our screen. Can we just like iterate a few like basic ones, like
Yeah.
let's say login? Like, is that
Yeah,
cool?
yeah, yeah.
Like you got your type user,
Yeah.
username, and or create. There's a
So-
create button underneath. Maybe you have different users to select from.
Because you're probably already part of the system at some point.
Yeah, so you have maybe some options.
Yeah, that's all really cool. And this is actually the step at which you have your token generated to identify you to the rest of the system. So you're using this dashboard as this identity, that's the token. So you can use it as this user, as that user, as this user, which are all different tokens. Those tokens can talk to themselves, fuck if I care. Right?
And I would also say it seems like in our schema or whatever, you would also have like I don't know how to represent like a network, but like to be able to log in on different domains.
Right. So this is actually this box here. The idea behind in my desktop version of the app, behind this element here, is that it's called context. And this is like your network. So whatever dashboard you have access to, and whatever the network of dashboards. So you access a dashboard to get your network. and that dashboard feeds you that information, and that information is going to be particular to whatever dashboard that is. So you can connect to different
Right,
dashboards.
and this is the kind of holonic fractal recursion.
Right, and it's like it's here. It's kind of like a drop down where you drill down a menu, you get an inner menu. You drill down that menu, you get an inner menu until you hit like a leaf. So, for example, in the mediation guild, right, we have the 12 mediation guilds. The first one of which is the education guild, which relists the 12 guilds because it's educating about them. And then you have that education guild, but there's no further. Because that guild is about the education part about the guilds. It's just going to run down the latter guilds. But if you step back to one layer back, and you go to like the technology guild or whatever, they're not going to have education guild. They're going to be all of the different corporate networks that use the mediation guilds to create the corporate offices, to create the state offices, all of those things. Those are going to be those guilds. So like, you know how to get a corporate office you have to have this guild, that guild, the other guild to be able to work in that office? We had that in our Excel sheet.
Sure.
So we would define
Yeah.
we define a corporate office, and then we'll say this guild is a necessity, like computing or data or technology. Like it has to be incorporated into the functioning of this office, right? So when you go back into your mediation and you have all those guilds listed besides education, which is going to be about the guilds again. So you go into your immunity guild. That's going to be all of those offices that take care of immunity and are have individuals who are holding offices in those holding offices that require immunity, holding offices that require technology, holding offices that require data. So all of those offices will be listed. State offices will be listed as well, and so that's how the core network expands out into the more concrete network, from abstract to the concrete, by reference all of the concrete implementations of the abstract thing. So that means that the
And
guild,
those are all dashboards within those, like within
yeah,
community.
each time you switch a context, it's a dashboard and an agency all to itself. So it talks to the dashboard framework as an agent.
Right.
So we have a parity between dashboards.
Okay,
and
so I
agency.
remember that. So I remember talking about that as part of this application. But how do we get there from login? Or that's not even where we're at. We're talking about conversation and broadcast.
So
Right.
from
so
login,
that's kind of a whole different.
so login gives you an identity token, coming together with something that gives you a mediation layer, like a server.
Right. And we were talking about, like, let's say your local church has a dashboard and you want to participate in some of their guilds or whatever. You would be, when you go to log in, you'd be selecting on your network, you would access, it would come online, the server, right? You need to type in an address or something.
Yeah.
And then
chances
log
are
in.
you'd already have it in your config somewhere already, because when you get the app, you're getting it from somewhere. That somewhere, if trusted, could supply you with the
Right.
bootstrap information.
Right. Okay.
So this is an element of trust, of course. The way it's supposed to work is that you don't have to trust the origin of the installation. You can get the actual program, verify it and whatever from that spot, but connect to a completely different server for whatever reason. Maybe you want to cook meth.
Of course.
I'll be right back.
And with that little tidbit, we shall take a break.
Is the trajectory making sense so far? I know it's a lot of abstract stuff besides the screen, but does that help build the screen?
We're getting there. We're getting there.
So we'll keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Not
Okay, so
So I think we're actually ready to start talking about screens in terms of markup.
no,
Yeah.
no, let's draw because okay, so you log in
Okay.
now.
No, I want to draw, but also point out where markup appears so that you have an idea as to how to consolidate the drawing with the visual part, right? Like, so you want to be able to map. I see this on screen. It translates to tag A, B, C in my markup to make that on screen. Like, you want that,
It
right?
seems kind of
So, like, to give you an example,
self-explanatory-ish.
well, yes, but when you start doing the nitty gritty, it's
like you have 1, 2, 3 dividers. This
right.
is an element
So
or whatever.
you're right. You're right. So what you're saying here is that you have section, right? So those are tags. So that means when you're designing this, you're going to put it into a section, and you're going to put this into a section. Section
Yeah.
being a different word for div. I tried to make that point stress that point really yesterday in our chats. So these are divs. Div. The word section shouldn't trip you up too much. You're just thinking divs, div.
Right.
Except this is a section. This is a section. This is a section. And then we have something called main. Main would be like a section, but for the whole thing. So everything is encompassed in the main because that's the whole screen. And then you will have like an aside, which is outside of the main, but is like serving as a side menu perhaps, or is hidden entirely, or whatever.
Yep. Cool.
And then you have things like articles. And articles are divs of self-contained information. A message, a conversation, a post. All of those are articles. So they're divs that are sections, but not of disconnected parts, but combined parts.
Okay. So for me, it kind of makes sense to go through the application from the beginning, which is login, because, and I know like, I don't know, that's just the way I'm thinking because I want it to connect with something.
So here's your login screen.
So we've logged in.
What do we need from the screen more? We have a token generated based on that login. We have 2 sections that we've identified. Right?
Right.
What else do we need from it? If not nothing, then keep going. Next screen.
Right, a bit of functionality, and maybe this network part could even be its own section.
Yep.
Like maybe that
Yep.
should be above the login because you set up your network before what you're going to log into.
Yeah, like, so that's a good point. So let's look at the screen and be like, when I'm a user, I put this app on my phone, I ran it, first thing that happens, what am I doing? So you're seeing this screen, right? How does the screen push you forward, asks you for things? What does it do?
Right. So maybe even like if we were to, oh shit, this thing is screwed up. We're running out of ink. So maybe even like this would be like the network would be at the top. So like welcome to your church. It may appear as the church, for example.
What does when you press it? What happens? Is it like a hamburger menu that comes from the side, for example? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because this like is the prime location for that menu. You got to think of existing patterns too. That's the other thing. So like you've used apps, right? Obviously. So when you click on those buttons, what normally you see? What do you normally see? Like this location is usually like it opens up a menu to the side, profile information, setting information.
Mm-hmm.
Which lines up with networking for sure. But what do you see? What do you see?
Well,
Do,
if
do you
it's
see choices of servers? Do you see an option to go into a choice of servers? Do you
probably,
see
yeah. So I would think like maybe a button that says connect or a hyperlink. If there's nothing there. Now, if you already joined a network, then it's just going to say welcome to this network, and in the bottom there may be like join other networks.
and how does it choose the default
The last one joined.
settings? Maybe
How do you pick a network, you mean?
to like yeah initially once you've gone through the step and you turn the app on again, where do you get dropped off at?
Um,
Probably something to do with current state of the app.
yeah. Yeah, I would think so. I don't know if you would have to log in again.
No.
Normally you don't.
Not on the native client.
Right.
A native client is the login.
Mm-hmm.
So like, when you install a native client, you shouldn't really have to do an authentication part. You should just generate yourself a token out of your information. You can have several clients, but that's a different story.
So, if nothing, I mean, this is unused. What if you press connect and like an address bar comes up or something for you to type in?
Address bar and options, pre-existing connections. So those could come from the origin of the app. Suggestions
Okay.
to connect to servers. So known about servers.
Right. Right. Okay. So then maybe a list
Yeah.
of known servers to connect
Like
on.
if you trust the origin of the app and its suggestions.
Right. So once you click one of these, then you'll come into a login, probably a login screen more like this one.
Depends. If you're using a native app, it's already its own identifier. However, if you're using only the web interface, you'll have to inject an identifier into that space somehow. That's going to be a login.
Right. Okay, yeah.
So you can literally create a version of a quote unquote native client working off of a server. So it's like a representation
yeah,
of one.
we'll start with the native though, right? I assume.
Most assumptions should pretend that we're running from a self-authorizing agent, right? Like, because you install the dashboard,
Okay.
that becomes the agent. Like, you don't need to authenticate with it. It's its own authenticator. You just say, "I'm this dashboard." And anywhere it goes, I'm this dashboard. So if you back it
Right.
up or
Well, it's like
transposing yourself somewhere
you don't
else,
have to keep logging in on your phone to your apps, right? All of your chat
right.
apps
But
are
if you go to a public library and you're using the web interface to
Yeah.
run through, you'll
Right.
have to be able to connect back to that agency.
Okay, so then we just have this order kind of in the wrong way. So first you'll show up with connecting to networks available. You click one, whatever one you want, or you can type something in. Then you've got your users here. You click one and you go in, right?
Yeah.
So now we
So this
proceed.
is more of a web situation, whereas this is more of a native situation.
But you may have different. You may want to connect to the dashboard with different privileges or stuff like that.
different agencies. So you
Right.
still have the ability in your native client to
Yeah.
be a different agent.
That's what I mean. So okay, so we've got that sorted out. So once you click your agency into that network, then what are you seeing?
Whatever the mediation of that network is. So all the guilds that are associated with it. Every
Right.
dashboard essentially acts like an aggregator of other dashboards, in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Did we do this in the right order? And these are fundamental guilds, right? Basically membership, mediation, and network.
So you will have a dashboard acting as the mediation guild. So potentially a user could connect to several different dashboards at the same time, all of which are mediation, all of which are consolidating contexts that they're isomorphic with as a single unit. This is where like the whole proxy and stuff becomes really interesting, because you can have like a dashboard that's basically dumb connected to a bunch of smart dashboards aggregating all of that information together. There's no limitation to really how this can happen.
Right. Okay, well, let's try to start with a simple sort of example. Does it seem like the right order, though? Like you would find what server you're going to and then say what agency you want on that server or that dashboard?
Right, and then you will also want to establish what mediates. So
So we're getting...
the point there is that you don't want to jump from your personal dashboard straight into like your corporate office dashboard. You want that transition to be mediated through the natural guilds, because the offices are an aggregation of several natural guilds. So your network should begin with your membership, your mediation, and through the mediation guild, then the rest of the network. And because the mediation can be consolidated in a very crazy ways, the next step can be like the entire world being network.
And again, this is what you're depending on here is the sort of holonic fractal recursion of these fundamental guilds. That's what we're getting at first.
Yep.
So in other words, our next screen is going to be the natural guilds, or list of them, or what?
Yeah, so you drop into your own dashboard initially. You're at the membership context. This is you talking to yourself.
But you're on a server.
You select the server, you can switch context to what the server provides you. Those are the mediation guilds. You jump into that context, you start talking in that lobby.
Okay. So
when you switch context, you switch lobbies.
Yeah.
So the set of agencies that can intercept the message changes with the context.
I'm wondering if that functionality is normally just going to be hidden to be able to see the mediation guild list.
It's like changing a group that you're talking to on Telegram. Once you switch groups, right, the recipients of your messages, the list of recipients changes with the change of group. In the same way, the lobby controls the set of recipients. So if you're in this server for the dashboard, it's going to be anybody who's in that server for the dashboard as well. If you have like a crazy contraption of a dashboard that amalgamates a whole bunch of them together, it's going to actually incorporate all of that.
I don't know if we're skipping ahead, because I'm sort of thinking of when you connect, let's say, to a church example, and they have many different guilds within it, say like a gardening club,
childcare,
cooking. So,
well, childcare is a strong one for churches.
Right, of course. So,
not that it matters to you much.
So I'm wondering what.
That was a dig. That was a dig.
My church has children too, so
my church has
not
children.
to worry.
That's a great answer. That's an excellent answer.
So I'm wondering, what would that look like? Because.
So the first thing you'll enter is the actual church's guild, not the individual guilds within the church.
Exactly. So why?
So you enter the church guild, and then you get a selection of switching contexts further. This church has this concrete guild, this concrete guild, this concrete guild it has access to.
Yeah.
So you go through it, and then you navigate with a conversation as to where you should plug yourself in that network. And you choose switch the context, introduce yourself. All of
that's
that
why I was saying, like, is some of this hidden? Because when you connect to your church
in plain
dashboard,
sight,
all you care about is gardening, cooking, childcare. Like, you don't care education and immunity, and you don't need to see this list of like the underground, like, under the hood.
I think I need you to picture the control the way I've been picturing it to make sense out of how that works. So you have a drop-down list, right? And drop-down lists can be nested. essentially, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in your membership, your drop down list is going to be like, okay, this is the mediation guild you've been connected to, and this is the network it's connected to as well. Say you switch straight to the mediation guild, you get the list of 12 guilds in your drop down again. So now to switch context, you've entered a context, so the list of available context to switch to changes. It's like a dependent drop down. So if you choose one option from one drop down, the options in the next drop down are going to be filtered by the first. So like if you select a province, right, in Canada, the list of cities that you can select from is filtered by that province. So this is the same situation where you step into the mediation guild, it filters out what it gives you as the next available list drop down as to where to go to next. Right? So if you go to like one of the guilds inside that drop down, it's going to start listing all the offices connected with that. So you're gonna get more concrete. So you start really abstract and really out in the ether as a member of your own agency dashboard. But as you switch into a more broader context, you become a smaller piece of the puzzle.
So, but isn't that what I was saying? How isn't some of this hidden?
Well, hidden in the sense that like the drop down is not going to show you everything at once all the time. Hidden in that sense, but the path from switching from this context to the next is very much like quote unquote hidden in plain sight. So you drop yourself down into these lobbies using the drop down, and every time you do that, you land in your different dashboard, which is taken care of by a different part of the network.
I guess I'm trying to imagine the connection point between like mediation guilds or natural guilds and conventional guilds, if you will, like the gardener's club.
Yeah.
Or the chef's.
No, I totally get
kitchen.
it. So your first context is your membership. So here you basically get a dashboard that reflects how you interact with the rest of the world. You can talk to yourself. You're the only agent. The agent is the dashboard. So whatever the dashboard's speaking to ends up being as an agent inside this dashboard speaking to itself. And you can have different variations on that. Dashboard and mood X, dashboard and mood Y. That's you as a member reflecting your moods back out into the dashboard anyway. So you're just talking to yourself. Then you drop, but you're connected to a mediation server. Mediation server in this case means a dashboard that has the 12 guilds. We're not talking about coherence, by the way. So we're not talking about perfection, right? We're just talking about representation. So ideally, this is going to actually be filled with people who are disciplined. But anyway, your buddy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, anybody who installs the program are all potentially connected to this one server that lists the 12 guilds. So every time you drop into this, it's a dashboard, 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 dashboard. The whole thing, dashboard. So we got a lobby. And we got lobby. Right? The overall lobby. The inner guild lobby. Each inner guild is then split into offices.
Education.
Is then split into offices in a two-dimensional metric. So we got your corporate and we got your state offices. Each one of them consists of mediation guilds here. Each one of these is actually one of these. So this dashboard aggregates all of the different potential
I feel like we have to
dashboards.
stick with an example and drawing actual screens, because like I I'm remembering like some of these concepts, but I have no idea like
So,
what the hell am I looking at? Like why?
okay.
Why are these members all connected? Like what these people have even to do with? Let's say this is education. Is that right? The 12 mediation.
12, well,
starting with
the first one is going to be, the first one's going to be education,
education. Okay, so
which is going to expand itself into 12 different sections about education.
yeah, I
each
know.
one for
I got
each
that.
guild.
So, but is this all these members? This is all for this server that you connected to?
Yeah, this server would represent all these 12 guilds, each individual guild within
So
them.
we're
So it'll
talking
serve
about
those roles.
something that has to happen before even you create the cooking
Oh, yeah.
guild, the gardeners club.
Oh yeah, bootstrapping.
Um,
So all of this has to be part of the bootstrap for sure.
okay, so that wasn't really clear, but
Oh, I thought it was. I'm sorry.
it's just like
So
yeah, I was wondering like how do we get to the gardeners club, but
okay, let me try to take you step by step through the interface. You download your program, right? You download.
I don't know.
your-
I think I should draw
All right.
because
You've downloaded the app.
yeah.
App is token, right? The initial bootstrap app that you get gives you an option to connect to the server.
Okay, so that's like this is this screen that we drew up here, right?
Yep.
We're just redrawing it.
You
basically.
like this screen right now is what you get when you just installed app and click the icon. Like nothing else has happened. You've downloaded and clicked it. Nothing else has happened. So immediately,
So there's like even a title, just connect
yeah,
to something.
it
Whatever.
gives you the ability to connect with the server that the app came with pre-configured with
So
as your
that's
main mediation server.
default.
Yeah, there's default settings,
Okay, and then we have maybe a few more
options.
options, and then the option to enter something.
Yeah, a completely random string that you would
Like
like to
other.
connect to.
Great. So these are all potentially buttons, and this has a button here.
Each one of those lands you in a dashboard server that lists the 12 mediation guilds, with the first guild, the education guild, also listing the 12 mediation guild. So a complete framework for education.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah.
Has to be there.
So yeah, this is what makes it isomorphic. You have the stack of natural guilds.
At that point in the bootstrap, every single guild
Now, are we
outside of education,
just skipping user selection, or
users become available through entering guilds. So if you enter a guild, whoever is in that guild is your potential users that you can connect with. So if I and you enter the education guild and enter the education guild from there, we would see each other.
that seems a bit weird. So when you enter the guild, there's a user list. You click on them, and you either have the ability to or not be that agent based on authentication.
Both of you are on the same server for the mediation, and both of you enter in that mediation into the education guild that it provides, because you've both entered into the same room, the same
So you're saying
functional
this
space.
has to be pre-set up before
bootstrap.
you can
Yeah,
connect.
there's definitely a bootstrap phase to the entire dashboard to allow for this to happen. The mediation part is that bootstrap.
Okay. So then what you're describing here, we don't select a user at all. We just...
We just drop them into a space where users can appear.
Okay, so... these 12 guilds, nobody knows what any of them are off the bat.
Right.
It's confusing as hell.
hmm
So...
So the first guild being education.
But let's just say, okay, so we click on our default, and then you get 12 guilds.
So at this phase in app development, especially when it comes to first install situations, what you would want to do is do a kind of a tutorial slash
Right.
guidance situation. So what you would do here is basically say that you've connected to what's called the mediation dashboard. The mediation dashboard requires, it has all of these things. All of these things are captured by the education. Proceed to the education and get yourself familiarized with the inner workings of each mediation guild that you're seeing. At that point in time, if we have
So
if we're starting from ground zero,
this isn't
here,
even specific to the network you're connecting to.
no,
This
any
is
one
training
of them.
for the app then.
Yeah,
So you don't even need this. This should all be available before you even connect to any server, shouldn't
yeah.
it?
You need all of these dashboards being isomorphic with each other and being a solid bootstrap to for users to
Shit,
engage
man. So
into.
now this is our first screen now.
Not user facing.
What do you mean?
The user, when he installs the app, doesn't care about that detail. We as devs care about how to guide them. They don't care about the detail of that navigation. What they would want to do is basically be dropped down all the way into the most educational aspect of it, to be like, okay, cool, you're in this guild, that's what it does. You're in this guild, that's what. So what you want to do is basically bootstrap the education guild and drop them into the furthest part of the bootstrap as a first thing, not as a second thing.
Okay.
Like you don't want to do it the second time.
Okay. Wait, I was wrong there. I think because when you're connecting into education about what, and all those 12 whats are each lobbies.
Yeah, and they're all fed to you right off the bat, so you're not that confused. Ideally already people existing there. They're talking about it. They're going to send you off to this guild, that guild, to educate yourself about this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah. So you have the impression, or you understand, the very first thing that's going to happen here is I'm going to be educated as to how to use the system or whatever.
Yeah, and that's been like the framework of guild dynamics from the get go. It's literally parallel to that.
And
It's doing exactly that work.
is now this makes me wonder how many of this education is so generic that it wouldn't be up to every network to teach you all of that shit.
Right. This is where the other guilds outside of education become paramount. So you step back out of education, and what you get is basically blank slots. Remember, we're talking about ground zero. So we're just bootstrapping the system from nothing. We have blank slots in every other guild. Only education is filled with any kind of information, right? But education drives what goes into the slots, right? So you start to get people coming back out of education, fulfilling the protocols of that came from education to the individual guilds. And now you have a bunch of guilds filled with people that can form offices. So say you get a combination of 4 guilds all populated with people, that's an
Right.
office
Yeah.
as an aggregate.
But you get what I'm saying, though, that there's this education is so generic that it shouldn't be up to you as a small network to teach you all of these things.
So this is, well, yeah, I'm trying to say how education is tempered by the feedback loop of practicality, right? You go into that education space, you figure out what to do in each individual guild, you come back out of the education space, you do those things in each individual guild, that manifests as an emergent office, right? And all of a sudden you can now utilize said office for this corp, for that corp, for this corp, for that corp, for this corp, for that corp, in that network. Because they're still all unified through the fundamental guilds, difference in corporations don't matter
and again,
less.
by office, you don't mean a specific office of a specific organization. You're talking about a virtual sort of office.
Yeah, first the virtual, but then the concrete. So you create the virtual office and then you apply it concretely to that organization. It's
Right. But the
the
virtual
organization.
office is the same office as it would be as if it's applied
Yes.
anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, and
Right.
that's what makes it irrelevant as to which organization. There's no competition between
Mm-hmm.
organizations. There's no,
Right. So we're
and
describing
and the state itself
the
is an
connection
organization that way.
connection between natural guilds and
Concrete manifestation of the offices.
the primordial archetypes.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, once an office once a, a, um, an aggregate of natural guilds is in existence, it emerges the office that it corresponds with, right? Like that's the isomorphism that we're looking at. That does not necessarily mean we have an organization that's taking that office as is. All that means is that we now can transpose said office as a very much already functioning unit of any organization that
Yeah.
could potentially utilize it.
Right. So this is sort of like the function of Portal Mountain is the education unfolded, education on the stack.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And each step is just actually an immersion step for something else.
And ideally, like I said, it wouldn't make any sense for every organization to have to have their own full spread learning environment for
Right. They can utilize. So if you think of an office as a concrete entity, you can have two different organizations utilizing the very same office in just different ways. Right? Like it's the same processes. It's just for different situations.
By the same office, you mean the same
People.
structure.
Yeah.
The same people?
Same. It could be the same people, or could be the same representation. Could be the same workflow. Could be whatever representation element for the work is. So you have the work, and you have a way to represent it.
Hmm.
You can transpose that representation here.
Yeah. Like you could have an accounting firm to like
Exactly.
help out a whole bunch of different
Sometimes
orgs.
it's the same people, and sometimes you know what, the ideal work in the ideal setup, what would happen is that if you're sick, and I can do the same job, I would not have that much loss of a context to just fill in for you
Right.
that one day or something.
Yeah. And again, this reminds me of like the gift economy and the way in which the institution and the corporation work together.
And also the core DNA from within. Like you gotta have something well enough from
Mhm.
within to facilitate.
Yeah.
To
Yeah, exactly. So
to make all of these interactions look natural.
it's the structure of organization. Okay, so take a short break there. DNA good. Okay.
All right. So I think I want to mention one last thing before we move on to the next topical.
Yeah.
So just maybe to ask it as a leading question instead. Do you notice that we're aggregating a whole bunch of dashboards into being one dashboard in some cases? And what do you see what that does to the lobby?
Yeah. Um, so where we would have these 12 mediation guilds, each with their own lobby.
Mm-hmm.
When you consider them all as one lobby, that's aggregating, and you would see a spam.
Exactly, until you step into the next context. And likewise, it's going to be the same with the offices, because the rest of the guilds are actually aggregations of their offices. You're going to see the chatter from offices appearing in the mediation guild itself, trickle down. In the same way that the education's
Trinkle.
in the way same way the education information keeps trickling into through this lobby, so will each individual office, of which every single corporation is an aggregate of. So you'll see individual concrete guild chatter, and then you will see individual concrete corporation chatter funneled through the abstract guild lobbies, funneled through the mediation. So mediation is going to be noisy as fuck as far as the lobby goes as a whole, because it's not going to just incorporate all the education stuff, it's going to incorporate all the mediation stuff, literal. So as you branch out into concrete offices, all that shadow funnels through to the mediation, which means it's going to be checked by the mediation guilds, right? Like the funneling through. One set of guilds spans a lot of offices. Each office funnels back through. Do you see the structure in your head? So an aggregate of mediation guilds
Can become an
becomes an office guild. An office
Yeah.
guild becomes part of this corporation, that corporation, this corporation, this corporation, this corporation. All of that chatter of the corporations goes back through the office guild, goes back through the mediation guild. So when you're in that lobby,
Yeah.
so there's noise to information situation going on here. On the one hand side, each individual aggregate is free to do what they want
No.
without having that funnel through back, but at the same time everything is checked by, because it
That's-
funnels through back to the mediation.
Right. But that's more of a. I think that's more of a theoretical thing, because you will only be connected to so many organizations at one time, right?
Well, humans, but
Here.
also automated. So all of those things can be kept in check and balance by just moving a layer previous. So for example, if you have a bunch of corporations that are in conflict somehow, right? You go back through their origin offices to figure out where the conflict is and where the resolution for the conflict is, because that's the medium in which mediation. That's the medium in which everything is resolved. So all of that aggregation goes flying back to the feedback observation loop in the mediation scheme. Mediation scheme fixes the problem, funnels back into the individual guilds. So this is the next protocol, this is the next protocol. Here the protocol is this, here the protocol is that. Together, these two conflicting situations work together. Going back to the DNA and resolving it there, and coming back out to the concrete. Back to the abstract, to the concrete. From the concrete to the abstract, from the abstract back to the concrete. And we're dealing with layers, so we have to be very mindful of the fact that once we jump a layer, we're going to have an incompletion or a contradiction situation. And to resolve it, we need to step outside of that layer to use a different language that encompasses both. It's the same concept that I was talking about with the layout and picking up information from individual components within the layout. So like search information being fed back to the feed that's displayed on your screen based on your query, right? Like there you will have like the specific component collect the information, pass that information up, and and from that point on, it knows how to drive the information back down.
Okay, so I'm thinking we should just continue like kind of where we left off, because I don't really know how that matters with the screens or like what's going on.
Oh, okay.
Based on what we have so far.
So you connect to a server, and say the server has been bootstrapped with previous individuals who have already been participating in the framework. That becomes that fills up the other offices besides education. So every participant that has gone through the education process
isn't an office.
It is one of them, but it's like the only one that doesn't feed directly into everything else. Everything else. So education feeds into everything else, and everything else feeds into the next step. So there's like a kind of a natural boundary that it forms, a sort of a sheltered environment. So let me try another approach for explaining. You connect to a server, right? Where's the Sharpie? Ah. You connect to a server. The server gives you a list of potential mediation guilds, right?
The list.
It gives you what it knows about. You pick one. So this is the screen after you've picked one. Picked, right? You pick your education guild. Here,
education isn't here, so I don't know what you're talking about.
No. You connect to a dashboard with the 12 mediation guilds. Here, given our perfect bootstrap, this leads into its own section of the 12 guilds regarding their education. Everything here is the same repeated list, but empty. There's nothing there. There's no people there. That's like how we're starting off, like the most basic bootstrap. You're the first person to use this system. That's what you'll encounter. Now, you go through this and slot yourself into this guild. This gives you the protocols as to how to make this proper.
Generic guild education.
Right. Now, you have a situation where if you aggregate these specific guilds, you have an office.
Okay.
So that gives you an office. So
the office is one of these, though. It's risk, value proposition, real estate. It's not education.
We're
education
talking about
isn't an office.
We're talking about here or here.
Right, but you said education is an office. I don't understand.
That might have been a misspoke. Just follow this structure. I will clear up everything. So if I misspoke, I misspoke. So you land yourself in a server. Say you're the very first person on said server. It has to be set up such that this is filled out and this is filled out, which allows you to slot yourself into here, 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 and here, and here, and here. This is what gives you that feedback. Those are assumed to be actual offices. Now you take this office and you have a bunch of corps.
Well, it's sort of like every one of these...
And a bunch of states.
Every office needs immunity, say. for
Right,
example.
right. So if this is immunity,
So if you're doing accounting, you need immunity. If you're doing project management, you need
yeah,
immunity.
yeah. So that means that every single one of these offices is actually a participant of this guild and that guild, no matter what. So that means if they are having their own personal communications here and here, all of that personal communication is actually laundered here in this lobby, and this lobby, and this lobby, and this lobby, which is represented by this lobby, which is representing all of these connected corporations and states, institutions rather.
Yeah.
Do you see that pattern?
Yeah, I get the nesting.
So you start off with a blank board and say we're the first two users. I take up these two slots. You take up these two slots. We combine our efforts together. That means we're taking up these 4 slots. That means we have this office. That means we have an office for this corp, for that corp, for this corp, for this corp. Like we have an actual functional, concrete thing that can feed back into these corporations and tell them what the fucking next step is, depending on their own agendas. So if you have your gardening happening here, right? This is where gardening would happen. How are you going to get all of these people lined up in this office, in this corporation for gardening? Well, they're all going to come from this office. How are they coming from this office? They're coming from these guilds.
Yeah.
And by the time they're talking about whatever the fuck the corporation is, it's going through their conversations in the office and their conversations in the in the mediation. So everything is mediated completely. So, in other words, when you are like on this level and you say something really, really stupid, our definition of stupid, what that's gonna do is that it's going to like not just appear here, it's going to appear in this office lobby for which everybody can give feedback to. But it's also going to appear in this guild, this guild, this guild, and this guild, who are each individually can say what the fuck the problem is.
Yeah.
So you're never leaving your platform of demands, ever. And this is enforcing the gift economy in the real sense.
Right? Apologies, probably.
Yeah. You just never gave warning.
No.
Something I could have appreciated last week, by the way.
Warning.
Do you know why?
Why?
Planning.
For whether we were going to do it or not?
Yeah, I didn't know until 1 o'clock.
Yeah, I didn't really know either.
All is forgiven.
It's the way it turned out.
All is forgiven.
Okay,
But do you see how that situation...
Well, we're down. Okay, that's fine, I think. Maybe I'll add another piece of tape where it's gonna, like, come...
But do you see how the situation, like the way I'm drawing it up, is like, even if you are making a decision in isolation that seems to be apart from the running core, if you will, if you put that string of information into your lobby, right, that's going to funnel through all the way to the entire mediation guild. That this has all been set up.
Earthquake.
So you're using the mediation guild to set yourself up for that feedback, and then that feedback is the thing that gives you back the nay or yay or nay, right? And you see how, like, even if you're making an isolated decision within like a corporate office, so not just office, but an office in the context of a specific corporation, you can't necessarily funnel it through the entire mediation process without stepping on somebody's toes if you're selfish. Because it's going to come back to the main office, which takes care of all corporations. and then that's going to come back to the main guild that takes care of every single fundamental run through. So you can't make those kinds of decisions as a unique thing that doesn't apply to your own DNA, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And again, just to kind of give this better context, this is like a gift economy type thing.
Like truly enforced, yeah.
Where we're talking basically like holonic interaction. Yeah, so
if you try to sidestep it, it's going to be noticed by the entire system.
in other words, this is a different way of forming organizations within the economy, within a gift type of economy, in which all of your agents or your actors, your people, can potentially have a hand in any corp, if you will.
Right,
Like
and which we cover with the whole office idea. Which,
if you have the ability to do accounting, why not help any? It's like any organization that's going on in your community, account for them, help them account. Who cares?
So, with that information, for example, is it easier to picture the trade guild? Like, so you have a trade guild here. It's going to be part of this office, this office, this office, this office, this office, this office, this office.
Yeah.
All of them are like generic offices that just help this organization, that organization, the third organization, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when it comes to being a membrane and an interaction with the external world and supplying the inner guild with actual material, mm-hmm. you'll have this one office literally serving all of these different corporations, creating that membrane.
In a weird way, it's kind of like there is only one corporation.
Yeah, but also not.
Right.
But also not. And like that's kind of like the weird.
Because of that, that's because of the DNA. That's what keeps everything the same in some ways, but allows it to unfold into its context.
It's like saying there's only humans, but it doesn't say you are this person or that person or the other person. Like that's not enough information to go by.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is what where screens are trying to actually navigate. So that's the context. And I think it's great that you raised it because context is going to apply to conversations and broadcasts in a very similar fashion.
Man, now we're crooked, but that's okay, I guess.
And I mean, that should be obvious since from the perspective of like you're landed into a lobby, right? And so no matter what you're conversing is being broadcast, no matter what you're broadcasting being broadcast. Mm-hmm. So because
that's
of that,
why it's so hard to kind of wrap the mind around it, because everything kind of slots into everything else kind of seamlessly, ideally.
So we have agency, we have dashboard. Shit, I lost my train of thought. So we have the agency, we have the dashboard, and we have the lost my train of thought on that one.
Are you talking about domains?
No, how to visualize this even more specifically. So, lobbies. We have agencies, dashboards, lobbies. If we take the understanding that every single agent is its own dashboard, those relationship becomes actually a little clearer. So you use your own app, right? It behaves as a dashboard to you as an agent to other dashboards. So whenever you switch contexts, right, your dashboard becomes the agent of conversation starting in that other dashboard. That's how that connection is made. Now, every time you have a dashboard at all, you have a lobby. And the lobby is like the unfiltered feed of everything that runs through it. Every single broadcast, basically, that is connected to that dashboard. Who could be an agent? If they're an agent, that means their lobby gets filled with the same information that the agency that they participated in the other dashboard. So basically, if you type a message in a different context, that context's lobby is going to have the message. You talking to yourself context is going to have the message that you said something to said lobby. Right? So the closer you are to yourself, the more noisy it gets. The further you are away from yourself, the less noisy it gets.
Sure, yep.
And this is the reason for it. So like, because you're coming from here, from your personal dashboard, if you happen to speak on the corporate state, it's just going to go to the office, to the actual mediation, to your own dashboard, because everybody was a participant in that conversation. So it treats dashboards and agents as two sides of a coin.
Mm-hmm.
And lobbies being like the accumulator of what's an agent and a dashboard.
It's, like the media.
Yeah.
Can we just go over one more time here? This part here. So we've got offices are kind of aggregates of various mediation guilds here.
Yes.
Or require, or in other words, these are the requirements to have a certain office.
Yes.
These certain offices are spelled out as 12 of corps and 12 estates.
Yes.
Right? So this is the generic organizational pattern.
Yes.
Now, how do we jump from there to a gardening organization, or within a gardening guild within an organization? It's a sub-organization.
So you go. We'll form it from both sides. From the outside going in, you have gardening requires office X, Y, Z.
Now, which would it would?
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to set up a concrete corp, and you're saying to make this corp happen, I have to have this office, and this office.
So the corp itself, you're saying, is the gardening community or whatever.
Right. It's the
owner
it's
of
top.
the garden.
It's the logic that comes top down. It's the causality that comes top down. The mythology is there. I need a garden. Right, and being that mythology, it requires this, and that office.
Right.
So,
and
you venture out into said offices, and you do like a vertical. So if you have offices here, like this, what you would do is you would section off, like to translate it to more physical
now
understanding. You would section off like a column from all the offices that you need.
You need all of them.
And this one is going to and they're going to.
You need all of them.
You need whichever offices are for whatever specific corp office that you need. So
the ideal group or corporation, like this gardening guild or whatever, needs all of the offices.
Yeah, it needs
they all need to be present.
So here's all the offices. You take a cross section from each one, and you take pieces of the office. See what I'm doing there? I cut off this column, and took this, put it there, and this, and I put it there, and that way all of the offices are involved in this corp.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't stop them from being involved in this corp or that corp or this corp or this corp or this corp.
Yeah.
It's just that these sections of offices fulfill that corporation. That corporation deals with gardening. The reason that this is all working is because everybody here is already in the same offices to begin with, and they might be in the gardening business or not, but all of them are talking to each other here, and they are all keeping it all coordinated between themselves over here.
Mm-hmm. I put this up on the screen, the just the corporate, so we can see corporate and state offices. And the reason
Yeah.
why it doesn't matter what, if you're having a childcare guild or a cooking guild, the ideal entity, so-called existing or being sustained, a sustained collective of organization, requires every single one of these things, starting from fundamental all the way up.
Yeah, it also speaks to like the idea that they're not built from scratch; they're built from existing components. So your childcare idea versus your garden idea actually does not necessarily need to be completely separated from each other. They're part of the same same idea of caregiving.
Right.
So elements of caregiving are going to be transposed to both situations, which means that they're going to have an actual like overarching quote unquote office to oversee that.
And like to pull out an easy example here, one that I think most people can understand, the Office of Real Estate seems pretty obvious. You need land to make a plant grow. You also need land to have walls and soft places and to hold toys and stuff like that.
Yeah, just have it all coordinated through one single space because it's the same fucking logic.
Right. Yeah. So your organization being like a church would those involved in the real estate office know that, okay, we have to, all these functions, that all these demands of our community, they need to be, we give this little bit of land there, we do this, set this land aside for that, this room goes to this, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but also like, so this is like talking about individuals talking about making those decisions, but also imagine like this coming back to a core cultural, so to speak, conversation in which we're like, okay, yes, that's a great idea, but if you do it here, it's going to shit on this, and that. How about we keep the core of your idea, transpose it over here instead?
Are you talking about another office interjecting?
So I'm talking about a situation where you are here and you start a conversation about a specific project, but the office that is overseeing the corp itself, being a conglomerate of the entire mediation guild, going, yes, idea good, but it will affect this, that, the other thing in a very, very negative way. So this office now takes charge and goes, okay, let's take this idea, let's try to make it happen, but let's try to navigate the implications of this idea
and
give you something back. So feedback observation is actually a part of this.
And layering, because you're having a specific subset organization maybe concerned with maybe even just real estate, maybe it's a big part of it, is like, okay, we want this land to go there, but then
the effect of
maybe the risk management office could be like, no, that you don't want to use that land for this because some bad thing's going to happen.
Right, like just like foresight and projection and all that kind of stuff.
Right, and so here we have specific offices or corporations, but here we could see maybe as the whole organization itself.
And because these specific ones are born from the whole to begin with, that whole has a very, very strict set of constraints to be placed on what can come out of it. And that's always been the role of guild dynamics. Guild dynamics has been a constraining framework, whereas the architect framework has been always the opened up. Now what do you do with these things? So if you follow the constraints, what you can do with these things, travel that tall order situation.
Right.
So it's not like a magic word either. It's just a specific way to do. Engage.
Okay, so
this is what we need to translate into our screens for starting a conversation. Context is obviously like a great part of the layout, but Keywords, layout. It means that context can be switched not just for conversation, but for broadcast, for workshop, for
And this is
automation.
context.
What we discussed, yes, is context. And once we
Because
get
this is
there,
like where you are, which lobby you're going to end up
yeah.
drilling down
And
to.
then, are you conversation, or are you broadcasting? Right? Like once you're in a lobby, like you don't have that limitation. Like you can take this path, you can take that path.
Right.
They become each other, which is a different story. But that's automation. All of that is taken care of through automation.
Right.
So making a conversation a post would be something the automation framework is going to take care of. But the key concept is to land into a lobby that is enclosed by its context. And that context is from way, way generic to being a member of a network, which means fucking nothing. It's a nebulous concept. To you being a part of a specific network with a specific orientation, with a specific mediation, with a specific set of offices, with a specific set of. But yeah, when it's his first bootstrap, the first users are going to encounter empty, 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 empty. And only this has to be filled out. And it has to be filled out.
Okay. I mean, that is kind of a lot. It seems like, although
It's a repetition of every one of our conversations regarding guild dynamics in app form. It's always been a lot. It's becoming a member of a network. So all of this a mediated network, and that's the key, right? This is how we're putting the mediation into the network to begin with. That's the procedure behind it that I call bootstrapping.
Burb. And with that, we shall be back.
doesn't have to.
Okay, it is.
So you know how in client-server architectures, when you have a client that's rich, essentially, when it's rendering itself, it can send out a message out to another server to grab a piece of data to complete its rendering.
It's rich, like it's got bling.
Like yeah, like it knows how to communicate with the outside
It's
world.
got a gold chain on its neck and stuff.
Right.
Okay,
So-
got you. I follow.
Shit. What was the point?
Something about pimping.
Oh, yes. So, can you grab me a beer?
Sure, please.
Sure.
So, it goes out to a server and makes an API request to say, I need this extra data, right, from this URL to fulfill my presentation. And
Sure.
I've been talking about the concept of proxies as part of the dashboard, and I just want to like clarify where that's coming from. So imagine instead of like going out into your database as a server and retrieving said data for that request, instead you have a URL for another dashboard and you forward that request to its exact same URL, just as if you've been requested by, and you retrieve the information from that server, who in turn could potentially be connected to a database or another API, and so on and so forth. So you can potentially have like a huge chain of dashboards that represent each other without being each other.
And
Right.
that's what you're talking about with this chain of stuff that we set up here, like a corporation, unfolding, unpacking into
very
offices,
much
unpacking into that.
Yeah, like, so I drew up a situation where it's like one server, but you can imagine this one server actually being a representation of several different, like, what if it takes the data from this URL from this API and data from that URL from that API? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it can represent 3 different dashboards all at once, without even being either one of them. Navigational and constraining all of that is a different category of problems to solve.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about like how do you control that. I'm talking about like possibilities.
Cool.
So like so you see how like a dashboard can be like itself, something else, a combination of, or like just a concept flying in the wind.
Mm-hmm. Isomorphism, baby.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to just kind of try to complete the picture here that we've formed, because
With the phone interface?
we've come up to this point of, let's say, a gardening guild, but that's only one part of, let's say, what a church is. So at some point you're going to have a whole list of things, including like building administration,
Gardening.
membership administration.
Look, think about church, gardening, childcare, small groups, worship schedules. Every one of these could be a concrete guild, right? Like in charge of
Yeah.
this thing, that thing, the other thing, that combines together into a much bigger guild behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this will flow back through its offices.
So, yeah,
stuff like
exactly.
that.
So at some point, you're making a list of these, like conventional guilds, if you will, and though each one of those conventional guilds, I think that might be the term,
Yeah.
is composed of an entire office stack. So it's taking up a slice of this office stack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to have that office ability, but once you have that ability,
Transposition of some
it can be
sort.
used to do any type of conventional guild.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of my point, is that there's got to be another screen now too with a list of conventional guilds, which is probably what most people are going to be looking at, because
So yeah. So that comes from actually when you start out here, right at the very beginning
Yeah.
of your bootstrap, you will have your link straight up to your mediation guild, which is what we've just discussed, but you will also have a secondary link to your network. And that network is going to be an aggregate of everything that's found from the mediation guild offices all the way to the concrete side. And it's going to take those corps and states, and it's going to list each and individual one of them as your concrete network. So you
Okay.
can bypass.
Does that include the offices though, themselves, which are sort of like
No.
generic?
No,
right?
no, the offices will be found through the mediation framework,
Now,
because that's what the mediation framework is doing. It's mediating the availability of offices to the concrete side. You can skip that all
yeah.
and just jump to the concrete side, but all of these things will come back to the mediation side of everything. Eh, So you can't really
Well, it has
escape
to
it, but you can
connect.
bypass.
Right. And also, I was thinking about the more traditional way that I've used the term conventional guilds is like
Proximity?
the accountants guild,
The proximity.
the project managers guild,
Yeah.
right? Where you have like a typical role that someone would take or do, and you turn that into like a teaching collective where
So-
people learn how to do that.
So this is closer to what the office guilds give you. So you will have like those kinds of guilds stemming from the offices, and then you will have corporations incorporating those guilds.
Right. That's what I just was talking about. Right. Mhm.
So like it's kind of like
But-
6 to 1, half a dozen to the other in a sense.
Within an organization like a church, it's kind of, you may not represent those conventional guilds. You just may not bother with accountants guild or this that.
Right.
Maybe
like,
you would, but maybe you wouldn't.
Right. Like the set of corps that you get here does not have to line up with offices.
Yeah.
What will happen is that you will have several offices being injected into one single corporate guild, and that covers the
Not several, a stack, a slice of the
well, yeah,
stack
that's
top to bottom.
I'm talking about, like taking a
Yeah. So 12, basically 12 offices to make a complete whole on or whatever.
right, implicit, explicit. That's another question.
Right. Most, let's say when you start a guild, most offices are neglected completely.
Like
they exist in theory.
So in theory, what we will have is like 2 offices exist in this corporation, but because offices are all connected together, those 2 offices are never in isolation from any other office. Right? Like anybody who's here makes up that office. So those offices still exist. So even if the corporation does not make use of the office explicitly, once that office is being used, it's going to come back to all of the other offices and have that conversation. So no matter how many offices you neglect, they're in play. So you can take the first 2 offices as like an explicit amalgamation of your corporation, an explicit aggregate. However,
Yeah.
once those offices communicate with themselves,
Right.
they are bound to the other office stack.
Like you can just invent a new guild, a new activity or something, and let's say you know only a couple offices, just barely enough to get a project management. Say like, oh, I want to start this project. The offices can come alongside that to start augmenting what you're doing.
Here's another great example as to why I love introducing us as 2 middle-aged white males as far as telling the world what to do. This is that situation in which we always come back from the conversation, sitting here, go back to our Telegram channel, who incorporates the rest of our offices, so to speak, and get the feedback, so that everything we say here, as outlandish as it might sound initially, is actually very tempered by not white, not middle-aged, not male perspectives, right? Like it's those offices come into play.
Ideally, yeah.
It's like that situation where you're talking about, like, you have an explicit corporation just consisting of two offices or one office, but because they're an office and they have to, like, reintegrate back with the rest of them, right, which comes back through this situation, there is no way to have the concrete without the feedback from the entire stack. Like, the level of constraint is insane.
Yep.
And it is constrained. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this.
Well,
this is extremely constraining as to what you should allow yourself to do.
The thing is, if those constraints are broken, which if you just pay attention to project management and don't care about how do you acquire space to do this, how do you acquire funds, or how do you get people on board, if you don't care about that, simply your corporation vanishes.
Right.
It disappears.
This fucks it up entirely.
Your idea will succumb to decay.
Right.
Entropy. That's what the office stack does. Is it's a
so now you're
it holds things together.
So now you're referring back to what the fuck coherence does for the system. How do you, like, disengage from bad players without having a system that says, I shun you because you've broken a rule? Because breaking a rule in one timeline could be a situation in which, like, you're testing out the waters as to what other rules you can break, but also, oh, I didn't realize that this was a rule to be broken to begin with, and I need to reincorporate myself into the grander scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that situation where you have an option of participating or leaving. The more you leave, the less the system has a reason to engage with you. You keep leaving it. Like, literally, you are fucking leaving it.
Mm-hmm.
So what the fuck? Why would you encourage any behavior in it?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Constraint. It's like, well, do you think about it as much as you want? Every corporation, every organization has this stack of stuff behind the scenes.
That's how you get fired.
It's all taken care of.
This is literally how you get fired. You violate one of those things. Bye. They don't give a shit. So with that, we have
We draw
our
a new screen.
Yeah, our first screen.
What, login?
So native, no. Web, yes. So native means that you are installing the program onto your client, and your client is responsible for isolating your data from the rest of the world, insulating it. That's private client situation. You can then
Okay, but again, so first screen you're talking network then. Like what?
how to connect to the network. Yes. So the app by itself is dumb, right? Like, it can't make decisions for you. So whatever your installation source is got to give you options.
Isn't it sort of like if you're on the web, then you have a user
Plus
login,
none.
but not a network, and if you're native, you have network but not user.
So if you're native, you have your I'm just gonna use this for my native client allegory. So this isn't everything. This is not web. In your native client, what you will have is a situation where you have access to the hardware. Right? So files, and really anything, you can write to the you can write to the file system, right? So if you're on a native client, you don't need a server, because everything that the server would have taken care of lives here. However, in the same context, if you only use a web client, then that means your native operating system has no capacity to use your file system, to use your resources of the internal computer. What it has to do is send all of that off to a server,
And this
which keeps track of client 1, client.
This is different from network, though. Server is
2.
different from the network.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to mimic clients on the server side for clients that don't have the capacity to run the software. So we run the software for them, but still insulate them in the same capacity as a native application would have insulated one native client from the other by being on different fucking devices. So in this scenario, the server acts as like, I am this device for this request. I am this device for that request. It pretends to be that client. And that is a very important element of the distribution element. But it all unifies on, you have an identity, a token for your client. You have an identity, a token for your web service. That has to be the same token. Once those things combine, you can have your native client existing on the web here, protected by whatever security measures you feel like or available or whatever. It becomes a non-question. It's like you can go that route, but you don't have to. You know what I mean? Like, you can have your entire client offloaded onto a server for backup purposes, so that you can engage with a web client after the fact, log back into your data, and pull all of that right back up, and it's all synced. It's like as if it's the same agency exists here and there and there, and it's all opt-in. So you can do it, you don't have to.
So you're talking about using a native client to download off of a server your entire dashboard, whatever you've set up so far.
Basically have like an entire parallel of your whole client state as is, transposable from you log in on your phone, you log in on your desktop, it just sends that information out. You do something on your phone, it shows up on the desktop.
Right.
And then
by desktop, you mean web browser?
No, could be the native client for the desktop. And then
But it could be
and
web
then
browser.
you open up your web browser, log into the same fucking server, and yes, exactly. And the web server is just like presenting you with an entire client to mimic your personal program. Right? So it's like it lives everywhere in the same way. It doesn't matter like if you're logging into a server,
right,
or if you're using an app, and if you sync those apps together, it literally will behave the same thing. You type something here, it will appear there. You type something here, it will appear there. It just syncs with everything.
So this would be dependent on the ability to connect to something like your church's network via either a web browser or via a native client, right? Because that's where your agency is interacting. The same agency, it doesn't matter which one. Therefore, it can all be synchronized.
And then you can enter your church and your other group and then send messages to both.
So with a native app, there isn't a whole lot being stored locally necessarily, except for at least your authentication is done for you.
Yeah, it's like a way to generate the token without having to create a password and a username. It is the password and username. That installation itself becomes the authentication
Yeah,
token.
I get it. And so maybe on the native app, you may have like caching or something
Mm.
to speed things up.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you basically you play with every tech you have available to
But
facilitate
still, the
the best
idea
experience.
seems to be that there's a maybe a master sort of copy on this, say, church network.
Fair. The way I'm tackling this situation is that the master copy is the client. So like if the client exists on a distributed network as well, it's going to be the very agency that controls the changes in state. So like it wouldn't matter if you logged into it through your native client or if you used the token from your native client in a web client. The interface you're getting presented with is the exact same one. So like you're on your phone, you're on your computer, and you're on your web browser. And if you're logged into the exact same context, anything you do here, same thing here, same thing there.
Okay, now this is making me think that typically a native app, when I mentioned caching, probably would pull down a mirror of the server and just interact with itself half the time and just sending out certain little bits.
Yeah, so in that situation, if you have a backup synchronization situation going on, what will happen is that you have a local database from which you're actually
Like,
interacting.
and this is what would let you go offline as well.
Yeah, and that database behind the scenes gets synced up with another database over here. So once you're logging onto a web client, that sync is going to be reflected back to you. And because those two things are synced behind here, if you do stuff on your web client here, again those databases will sync up. And so when you pull up your native client again, it's connecting to the same source. Again, you have to set this up. If you don't set yourself up with a backup, you're clearly not going to have one. If you don't set yourself up with a distributed version of your own identity onto servers, right? You can't expect it to reflect back your identity. Like that's just not going to happen. So you can isolate yourself entirely, or you can distribute yourself entirely, and you can take up a
So-
space anywhere in between.
My thinking here is I'm kind of going back, just thinking kind of way back years, I guess, with like the card game and all that kind of stuff, and the value of protocols, and the way in which this sort of area here, I guess, with all your mediation, which is you have a bunch of protocols. This, from your native app, say, perspective, could be a conglomeration of a whole bunch of different networks, but these are your protocols that you worked on, that you know about, and it should be right at your fingertips, no matter if you're offline, online. You know what I mean? Like just a pile of protocols.
So whenever we're talking about like connecting to a server, for example, the other option is here you're downloading the server's content to be part of your client.
Right.
And so your client becomes your server.
So if
you trust it.
If you wanted to, say, clone your church, you have all the protocols that are being used, and in theory you could just copy and paste almost, like new network.
Better than copy and paste. Transpose. So you create another new entity, but everything from the old entity feeds
That's what
right
I mean.
into it.
There would be no duplication of the data.
So you can keep the old and have a new,
This is
and
what
they won't interfere.
I just wanted to get at the point of having like an archive, if you will, or a personal database of vast amounts of protocols for doing anything. It's like in the Matrix when Neo puts a disc in and learns kung fu.
Did we cover that? Did we cover that transition?
No, I don't think we did just one network.
Well, no. I think we can.
Like today?
Yeah, I think what we can do is like use what the description was to cover that area. So you have your drop down, right? In your drop down, you are a member. You start off basic bootstrapped You just installed the app. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. You have an option. You can go to your mediation guilds. You can go to your network guilds. And you can talk to yourself. Those are your three options. Membership, mediation, network. Right?
Great.
You choose, let's say, Ben Shapiro style, let's say, for whatever reason, you're dumb enough to go to the network first. You're going to be... Okay. Imagine those question marks are filled out. The network's been used for a while. It's been bootstrapped. It's there. There's people on the network.
There's a lot of assumptions here because there are many views of the network and in little chunks of it.
I tried to give you the empty network, but now let's start with there's people on the network. You're just joining.
Which network?
The guild network.
Yeah, but like, how do you access? Like, where
people have already installed the app. Like, just assume they've gone through the process, and you're the next person to go through this process.
What common media? So you're talking about like this church, let's say network. There's 50, 100 members in this church, and now you're joining it. That's what you're talking about, right? So all this...
And by joining it, I mean you're installing the app.
Yeah.
That's literally like the act of joining. That's membership.
If it's the app
you install the
that
app.
points to their network.
Yeah.
Set up, preset.
So you install the app. So the app is giving you what? It's giving you an identity token. Like to start interacting with the rest of the network.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to give you access to whatever server it came from as a starting point for all of its mediation guilds. But because the mediation guilds expand into offices and corporations, it also has a network tab that lists the corporations.
Not the offices. Offices are virtual mediation.
Right, because one office can belong to multiple corporations.
When we're talking concrete, that's what you mean by network.
Yes,
corporations.
It's going to land.
So you're trying to
past
list
those steps.
You're trying to list every single facet of the church.
Right.
Facet of organization.
So you're going to have all these internal offices that are like more about the mediation of the church and the whole church, and you're going to have offshoots of activities that hold up the protocols of said mediation. This is the same concept. So
wait, say that again. I don't even
so
like. I get. So we're clicking on network. We're seeing a whole list of like the kitchen guild, the gardener, the admin guild. So there's a whole list here. Okay, now what's the problem with that?
Nothing.
Why is it stupid?
You click into the kitchen guild. What you're going to get really is an aggregate of the guilds that make up that office.
Mm-hmm.
Or all of the offices. That make up the kitchen guild. So if you have an office that says, I got to take care of uncertainty. If you have an office that says, I got to take care of
value proposition.
Any of those things, how do they map to the primordial archetypes? Okay. How do they map to the primordial archetypes? How do they map to the natural guilds? So every member in the natural guilds that serve the primordial archetypes, that serve that office, are part of the lobby. So if you're in the most concrete part of the office, you send a message, it's going to go back through this network. It's going to go back to the corporate offices that this corporation belongs to. It's going to pick up those offices and send a message to them. That's going to be consistent of every member of the guild that belongs to that office. That's going to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And so the very the most encompassing layer of conversation that's going to actually happen is going to be way back down at the guild layer that constrains itself against every single one of its own activities.
So you're talking about dropping into a lobby and typing a message, say starting a conversation within the Gardeners Guild.
In the corp?
And that's going to appear under basically every single guild.
It's going to appear to every single office that comprises,
which is all of them.
In general, it's
therefore
usually going to end up that way.
mediation guild.
It's usually going to end up hitting most of them. Yes. And that has to do a lot with the fact that everything is very complicated.
No, that seems a bit cumbersome. I guess we're talking filtering and that kind of stuff, but
there has to be a shitload of automation involved.
Yeah.
A shit ton of automation involved. Because
right. This is just the potentiality of it.
We are exposing the basic problems, but the solution to our basic problems are fucking obvious. So we're not talking about the guilds like sitting there babysitting shit. It's talking about like raising up every single one of these concerns every single time anything happens. Just like, wait a minute.
Potentially.
Like, wait a minute. You want to do X, cool. But that does that. It does that. It does that. It does that. We have all these protocols for this, and this. How does it all fit back together?
I think it seems to me like we're gonna have to do, like, I don't know if it's called storyboarding for applications, because
it is.
If you drop into Gardening Guild and you're like, hey guys, I think there's some pests or something, like, then you're not talking real estate or like human resources necessarily. No. For the most part. Like, you're talking immunity, for example, like we need to protect the space. So that message doesn't necessarily need to be read by all these offices.
You're actually introducing another step into the whole thing. Usually people are like, there's this direct problem, and then there's this like indirect problem, and then there's nothing. However, what we're talking about is that there's a medium between all of the direct problems and the indirect consequences.
So potentially the solution could involve any number of offices, and it's really impossible to tell which one.
Not as a prediction.
You can't automate what this conversation is going to go to.
No, you can only follow patterns. So you can follow patterns and automate that.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't actually like try to encode the living material into it.
Now this makes me think that about most people are not drinking from the fire hose, as it were. These lobbies, these aggregate lobbies, where there's just flooding, no eyeballs aren't sitting there watching it, right? You're having automation picking out terms for maybe to be, okay, this might be dealing with this office, this might be dealing with this office.
Ideally, in that circumstance, is what should be happening is that you start off with people. If the people are doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and that just doesn't change, they should be able to encode the process into their workflow, right? Like, it's not about like taking away the computing power from people and just like making them check themselves every time they use it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like once they use it enough, obviously fucking use it.
Okay, so this also makes me think of another thing. The dashboard for say the Gardeners Guild is going to be shaped, right? It will end up looking unique to what gardeners deal with. For example, there may be a section for pests.
Yeah.
And that anything entered into that section may specifically go to immunity.
Yeah. So what we'll have is like different interfaces, different styles of interfaces to engage in conversation and in broadcast. Something like pests could be a very curated kind of broadcast. Ways to deal with pests could be a very curated ways of conversation, right? Like, you can take and refine talking and spewing information out into the world into different, massage it into different variations of the context of the concept.
Well, as fascinating as that all is, I believe we're basically out of here. So I'm going to call it a day and shut the stream down. It's been lovely as always. Jenny is on his way. And catch you next time.